Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. My name is Jeff Blankenberg, and as we do every week, we're here to answer your questions about Alexa development, ambient computing, smart home, all the things. Today, I've got just a couple of announcements for you, and I've done a poor job at making these actually visible for me, so give me 1 second as we fix all of our things here. If you guys didn't tune in, last week we had a new Tech Talk come out. And I'm not tooting my own horn here, but it was my content. It's called 5 Things Every Voice App Should Do. And it's a list of some great best practices and some things you'd really want to make sure you pay attention to as you're thinking about building skills. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, please check it out. The URL is there and in the chat. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that if you guys recall, we did a bunch of cool things with Alexa in space. And so we have 5 new videos on our YouTube channel talking about the behind the scenes and all of the things that happened as a result of our Alexa in space efforts. So if you'd like to check those out, those are also available, like I said, on our YouTube. Really, really excited about all the cool things that are happening in that, no pun intended, space. There's one more thing, next week's office hours. So we're talking about web API for games today, and we'll get to our guests in just a second. But we will be talking about the Alexa Learning Lab next week. If you haven't played with the Alexa Learning Lab, this is our place for you to come and learn about all of the deep subjects that we have related to Alexa development. There's a course there already about APL, and we'll be rolling out a number of other courses over time. So if you haven't used it yet, now's the time to check it out and make sure you get started. But if you have any questions or anything, we'll have the team here next week to answer any of those. Also, we have a couple of blog posts we launched, just in case you've missed those. The first one is just about building skills, thinking about what the team used as valuable inputs for the newest version of the Alexa Skill Builder. And you can see the whole blog post there, the whole story about what's going on. And then finally, the thing we're here to talk about today is Web API for Games. They have a brand new blog post all about the available tools for building games on Alexa using our Web API. So I think that's probably a really good place for us to kind of transition and talk to the team that's here. So let's get right to it. I'm going to flip over to this view. And look, they're all sitting here waiting to chat. So Chris, Ryan, thank you guys for being here. And certainly Amanda, always good to see you. All right. So guys, we've talked about Web API for Games. We've talked about the blog post. I'm sure that will come up a few more times during our conversation here. But my first question for you, Ryan and Chris, for those that may not know, what is Web API for Games?
Sure. So Web API allows you to build web applications with Alexa to build voice-forward games. So you can use the tools and technology that you already know, whether it be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or a game engine like Phaser. You can build some pretty interactive games on Alexa. It's one of 2 multimodal technologies that we support. One is the Alexa presentation language, which Karthik Ragabuthi and Kay Lurch last week or the week prior, I think, were really diving deep on that. Chris, anything else you want to
add? No, that was great. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing higher quality games on Alexa devices with screens, and one of the ways for us to get there is to give people tools that they're familiar with. And HTML game development has a long-standing tradition, and we're proud to be able to offer it on our devices now.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point to make for everybody, right? Is that when we talk about Web API for Games, what we're really talking about is HTML-based games on devices like Echo Show, right?
And Fire TV.
Perfect.
Yeah, don't leave out the Fire TV. So there's something super cool about having a game up on a large screen and talking to it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But I think the big shiny object in the room is the idea that developers can build their games for those devices using something like HTML that they may be super familiar with and have a rich history with, or even have existing games that they've built in HTML, versus something like APL, which for many is super powerful, but it's new. It's different than what they may have done previously.
There is a learning curve associated with it, yeah.
Yeah, so for folks that are in that vein and have those kinds of skills and technologies available to them, what's the best way for them to get started using Web API?
Well, we recently launched a boilerplate, a Hello World boilerplate to get started. So this is on the public Alexa GitHub. So I would say the best place to get started if you are familiar with HTML and JavaScript is clone the repo and get started with your Hello World game. The standard plug of checking out our tech docs would be the next step. as well as the new blog post that allows you to really dive deeper into walking you through what framework you might want to use. Also thinking about your design. It's one thing to bring over a title. It's another thing to really think deeply about what makes voice gaming unique. I think Chris has got a pretty good example of where that's really powerful, and it is a lot more convincing than tapping some buttons on a screen.
Yeah, design aspects really come into play a lot when we think about voice, not only from the voice design, but just the screen form factor and how things are presented to a user versus like living in a browser with a mouse and a keyboard.
Yep.
For sure. Is there any specific framework or technology that we generally recommend developers think about as they're building web API for games?
Well, actually, let me tie that back to the previous question a little bit more. The best way to think about coming into this from an HTML games background is you're still building a normal game. You can host it anywhere on the web. What you'll end up doing is telling Alexa where to load that from, so you'll give it a URL. And then side by side, you'll build an Alexa skill that will let you describe to Alexa what your players are going to say, the language model we call it. But then you can treat the skill almost just like a controller for your game. So your game's going to run normally on the device with a normal update loop and a take loop, and you'll get events coming down from the skill that just tell you what the player's been saying. So from that point of view, you can really pick any way you normally make an HTML game. There are lots of fabulous engines out there. I tend to like writing stuff from scratch because I'm a 20-year-old game developer who already knows exactly what I want, and so I tend to write that out from scratch. But there are plenty of tools, and I think it's best to use the one that you are already familiar with.
I think that's the right answer too, is work in the tools that you're most familiar with. There's nothing more challenging than trying to learn something new, like how do I make an Alexa skill talk to a web page? But then on top of that, also like, oh, and now I'm using React or something else that I wasn't familiar with to start with. That's an added layer of frustration. Agreed.
Yeah, our sample, the one that we just put out last month, is actually the basic level of this is what the skill needs to look like in order to communicate with an HTML page, and then the actual HTML page itself is just an HTML page that just echoes stuff backwards. So we're hoping that that's really easy to sort of plug and play, just replace the URL, and now it's your HTML page. Right. The skill's already working, it's already sending messages down, and you can take it from there. Having said that, we are working on a number of integration samples with popular bits of HTML technology. Don't want to mention them yet because it's more of a surprise when we whip them out. But we've got a couple in the pipeline, and they're super fun and super cool, and we're hoping to share them with everyone in the coming months.
Maybe we'll have you back on when you've got those ready, and you can show them all off here too.
So looking forward to it.
Yeah,
very exciting.
So, I mean, you just described one of the capabilities, right? The ability for me to talk to a skill and have those events funnel down to my web page that I can then interpret and interact with the interface the same way that I would with a click or a keyboard stroke. Are there other capabilities that are unlocked as a result of using voice-only games kind of experience with the web?
You want to do this one or me, Ryan? Because I think we're both super excited to talk about the rest of it.
Yeah, I think I'll start off and then I'll tee it off to you, Chris.
Okay.
I think one of the things that the Web API kind of brings you is it does allow you to take advantage of more of the capabilities of the device. So you have accelerated 2D and 3D graphics. You have complex touch support. So being able to do like gestures, pinching or like doing like a match 3 title where you can like drag your cursor around or drag your finger around rather. These are things that are not, possible with other multimodal frameworks like APL. The other thing is really allows you to get into some complex audio work by leveraging web audio. So you can have different tracks, you can fade in and out, you can duck the microphone as you need it to, as well as when you have interstitials between your scenes. So if you're going from like a loading screen over to like your player screen, over to like your battle scene, you could have that underlying like background audio track. So these are just some of the things, and then I'll pass it off to Chris to dive into some more.
I'll take the opposite point of view. So Ryan told us why it's cool for skill developers to get new features on screens and things they couldn't do before. Looking at it from the opposite point of view, as an HTML game developer, Alexa offers a wonderful way to get your games onto devices that people are using frequently. So it's a good It's a good outlet for HTML gaming, but because you're connected to an Alexa skill, you also get access to all of the Alexa skill features, which includes Alexa Store and monetizing your HTML game, which I think is super cool. So any HTML game launched on Alexa is already connected to a customer who's logged in. You can skip all of the usual HTML5 login difficulties, finding people's identities, getting them to, all of the friction between them looking at your game and saying, oh, I really enjoy this, and you being able to profit from that.
Yeah. No, that's, I think those are both really strong aspects. I would be curious to know as we get a little deeper into this, for some people that maybe haven't had an opportunity to do this, what are some of the more popular web API games that people that are watching right now or that our customers are using, that are standing out? And of course, what is it about them that makes it unique?
Yeah. Some of our more popular games that, leverage some of the unique capabilities of the web API. One would be a game called MyLoft. So think of a very light version of The Sims, where you're a hotel manager. You can decorate your house, you can buy different things, you have to entertain guests and improve your rating. It's just a visually stunning game with fully rendered 3D characters and text-to-speech lip synchronization. So it really does feel like you're in the game. Another one that I really enjoy is called Volley Solitaire. So this was built using a framework called Play Canvas, which we'll dive into in the future. But it is a beautifully rendered game. It's got a lot of familiar retention mechanics, like loot that unlocks every 8 hours. It supports rapid fire gameplay. So as you're seeing the cards on the screen, you can say, for those that are familiar with Tri-Peak Solitaire and the rules that go along with it, you can say things like 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack of Hearts, and that will just rapid fire on the screen. So it's very engaging, where you don't have to barge in consistently with a wake word like Alexa or computer. And it also has a built-in tutorial. So again, it's very approachable. And again, we started off this conversation talking about the technical capabilities that Web API offers. It is one part of many where being able to bring in an approachable kind of first-time user experience goes a long way. So those are the two, MyLoft as well as Volley Solitaire. But there are a whole host of them, which we do go over in the blog for those that want to check it out.
So we're going to get a little into the technical here, because I saw this question asked in the chat, and I'm curious about this as well. So I'm a developer. I have an HTML-based game that I want to make available as an Alexa skill. And I build my experience, right? I've done everything that we've described. I now am able to take commands, move them down to my interface. The game is all working perfectly. I have two questions. One, what is the experience like for someone on a device without a screen? And what are my responsibilities as a developer to provide a voice-only experience when the screen is so incredibly important to the experience of the game?
Sure. So the short answer is Web API doesn't run on devices that don't have screens, but your skill does. And so your backend will still be invoked if someone tries to launch a skill. We're okay with skills that require screens. So if you're making a game that requires you to drag around things or requires you to visually see a map in order to be able to interact with the game, it doesn't make sense to try and run that on a headless device. So it's perfectly fine if your skill's response is, this skill requires a screen. Please try it again on a device that has a screen. We do, however, encourage, like Brian was saying earlier, there are games that want to do retention mechanisms to call people to play, to do things that are time-based, so energy kind of things, or progress kind of things. We definitely encourage developers to think about whether or not there are any aspects of their games that they could make available on headless, and let gamers check in with those games in places where they would like to interact with gaming but don't have the ability to. So think about the car, think about the sort of morning in the kitchen kind of deal, routines where your hands are busy, but we have customers who are speaking to Alexa. There is an opportunity there for the gaming world to talk to those customers as well, and we're excited to see what people might come up with.
Cool. I think this question primarily comes as a certification question, though. You said we're okay with having skills that just say, sorry, we require a screen. Does our certification team feel the same
Cert
way?
is fine with it as well. Yeah,
Okay.
there's no problem. This is not evangelism. This is not one way evangelism.
Okay.
We already have several skills that behave that way.
That's
Okay.
right. In fact, Volley Solitaire and MyLoft, the two that I had mentioned, are both web API or screen-only devices.
Cool.
Riffing off of what one of the comments that Chris made is, we often do see a lot of our skill developers, for example, taking a look at like The Price is Right or Song Quiz or even Question of the Day. These are 3 web API skills that also have an APL fallback as well as a voice-only fallback.
Interesting.
So you can check on when the in your launch request, you can look into the supported interfaces array and see, does this support the web API? If so, load that, and then you've got really high fidelity gaming experience. You can check to see, oh, it doesn't support that. What about APL? If so, load up your your APL directives, and then if you are playing on a DOT or Auto or something, some 3P AVS device or Alexa voice service device, you can also just go fully headless. So it does require a heavier lift on the developer to kind of maintain those 3 kind of separate code paths as well as the logic, depending on where it sits. But that is the best way to reach the widest array of customers, is by having a web API, an APL fallback, and then a headless fallback from there.
Cool. You just bent my brain sideways a little bit. I wasn't aware that there are devices with screens that support web API that support APL that don't support web API.
Yes.
Can you give me an example of one of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So Web API is supported on all modern Fire TV devices, and I think Chris can correct me on this one. I believe 2018 onwards, as well as all Echo Show devices. But it is not supported on, for example, your Samsung fridge or the Facebook portal. These are devices that are either second-party or third-party devices that have integrated the Alexa voice service or AVS, and Web API currently is not supported on those.
Got it. No, that makes sense. I hadn't considered that we were just talking about like older versions of devices that exist today. But if you have the newest version of almost any device that supports Alexa interactions with a screen, I would expect that both APL and Web API are supported, unless we're talking again about niche cases like Auto or something like that.
So yes and no. All Show and Fire TV devices, you got the thumbs up for Web API support. But if it is a third-party manufacturer like an LG TV, a Samsung TV, a Samsung fridge, a Facebook portal, these devices don't support the Web API at this time.
Got it. And honestly, that makes sense, right? Because we're talking about third-party devices. They have the ability to control and pick and choose what they do and don't want to support based on the hardware they want to include in their devices. So
yeah,
I think that makes sense.
And one of the things that we go into in our in our blog, and again, we're really just scratching the surface on this, is what can you do to optimize the performance of your game on our devices? Our devices have a wide range of hardware configurations. And one of the things that we don't have control over are the hardware configurations of third-party manufacturers. So to ensure, we've got a high fidelity, really good CX gaming experience, that's one of the reasons why, we've chosen to limit the web API to those devices at this time.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about Alexa as when Alexa's on her own devices, it's an Alexa device. When Alexa is on a different device, on one of our partner devices, sometimes it's really Alexa as a voice assistant, and not something that takes over the screen. So on some of our third-party televisions, they're focused on their own experiences and their own screen experiences, and Alexa's there to help. And in those cases, it is not appropriate for Alexa to take over the entire screen. And so I think the great diversity of Alexa devices and use cases are its strength. But in this particular case, it means that Web API games are targeted at a subset of devices where the device's primary purpose is running Alexa visuals.
I think that makes sense. And while I can certainly see a time where someone might want to play solitaire on the refrigerator, I can certainly understand why those kinds of capabilities aren't there all the time. Well, that Ryan, a point you just made leads us to my next question. Are there any kind of performance gotchas that developers should be aware of as we think about building for all of these different kinds of devices?
Absolutely. I'll start off, and then I'll let Chris kind of deep dive on this one. I think it really does first start off with like choosing the right framework. There's no sense in choosing something like Phaser, which is a 2D accelerated game engine that has object scripting, parameterized animations, sprite management, etc. If all you're doing is a very simplistic game, you might be better off with something like just vanilla JS, JavaScript, or even something like a WebGL renderer, right? So don't have the additional overhead up front if you know you're not going to use it. And if you do decide to go down that route, consider which libraries or modules you need to include. So most game engines like Phaser or PlayCanvas or Pixie.js, etc., they will allow you to create custom builds. And taking Phaser as an example, its out-of-the-box build is something around 970 KB or close to a megabyte. If you only need a subset of that, you don't have a game that's reliant on physics as an example, or advanced graphics capabilities, you can get that down to just a few hundred KB, and like optimizing your load time by like 66%, like that'll go a long way to getting the first frame rendered on the screen.
Yeah, physics engines are not light. They're powerful, but they're definitely not light.
Yeah. So from my point of view, I think we're planning to do a blog post on this exact topic. So thanks for the lead in there, and stay tuned for more details. But I think one of the big things to think about. Sorry,
they said it wasn't planted at all.
Oh, did you plant that?
I gotta say, the more you guys talk about what you can and can't do, the more I have ideas for games I want to make. I'm just those ideas are already exploding out of my brain. Like, oh, I just had a cool idea for something I could do that would.
And that's what we want. That's why Chris and I were so impassioned to come onto this chat, because there is so much capability out there, and we see a lot of opportunity. But Chris, back to you to kind of dive into a little bit more of I think an area of your specialty.
If there's one thing to think about early on, it's probably that startup time is relevant. So on a PC or a console, in other gaming environments, boot up time is kind of okay. People expect it. But on an Alexa device, people are expecting a response pretty much as soon as you say something. So it's really important to follow all of the usual web design best practices so that your time to first paint on the page that you're using for your game is as low as possible. So defer loading of scripts, think about assets, think about what you need to display to the customer at the start. Think about the fact that on a device like Alexa, people tend to jump in and out of things pretty often. So maybe don't design with like a start screen and a lengthy startup to each gaming session. Imagine how you might be able to drop in and out of the gaming session usefully, like resuming the game in the middle of where you were, and how that impacts your engineering. Like how do you set up the startup of your game so that you can jump directly to where the player's save was, right? Like don't bother loading the initial sort of like intro presentation to your game. Load your player's save game first, and then figure out like what you need to load off of the back of that. Doing that later is much harder than planning to do it from ahead of time.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, if you have a game with like 100 levels in it, and I'm on level 9, to take me to the start menu and then take me to the level of menu selection, and then I hit 9, and it seems like it would be better to just load me in at 9. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you were playing 9 and then you quit, and then because you went to the bathroom or because you had to answer the doorbell or something, and then you come back 3 minutes later and you say launch the game, there's no point in launching the start screen and your start screen music and loading all of that and streaming it and then getting your player to press the like continue button where you pick up where I left off. Just go straight to the level 9.
Yep.
One of the kind of consistent trends that we see with games that do well on Alexa is what Chris was referring to, is like really snackable content. Right, it's lightweight design, it's snackable content, allows you to kind of jump in and out quickly, and it has typically games that have fresh content daily, or ability to come back, or reason to come back. Right, that's that retention mechanic.
I think that's good advice. So Amanda, I'm curious, like, what's popping through your head right now? Give me one of those ideas.
Well, originally I was thinking that it would be really nice to create some kind of board game type structure, like a Battleship or something like that would be really fun. But there's one thing, like you're talking about like loading stuff in with Phaser, and I'm thinking, oh, you could do a shooter, but what if you were like the pilot of a vehicle, like a giant robot, and you controlled the giant robot with your voice? That'd be so fun. Can I work on that now? I don't know. I have so many ideas. I always have many more game ideas than I can possibly come up with.
Yeah, I think my selfish reasons for trying to promote more Alexa game development is because I have way too many ideas to ever make in my lifetime, and I'd like,
Right.
I'm more than happy to whisper into people's ears and see what ends up coming out of the community.
Oh, I love it.
Because I never thought about making a shooter, but I think you could do it like if it was more of an indirect control kind of mechanism, and it might be really, really interesting, especially if it was like I said, like it was like
Yeah, I mean,
vehicle.
exploring that, you're really talking about tactical strategy because you're
Yeah,
issuing
yeah.
commands, right?
Right.
And then I've thought a lot about tactical strategy on Alexa and how neat it'll be to give compound commands, things that one of the
This is
things that we
key.
have like as an internal tenet. Sorry, I'm going to go off now.
Go,
But
go.
one of the things we
I wanna
know
hear.
is a wrong move is you can't replace a button press with voice. It's just silly.
Right,
Like
right.
in occasion,
You'll never
in
get
some
faster.
occasions, yeah, in some occasions it's kind of fun because it's the role playing aspect, and that's cool. But like the general cases, the mechanically interesting applications for voice are maybe most easily summed up by: would you otherwise have to type this? Like, is it a search or a compound structure with multiple slots in it? Is there logic involved where the computer has to interpret some ambiguity of what you're saying? So I think tactical games and strategy games have like a huge amount of possibility here, where you can indicate sort of unit selection in natural language, like take the 3 things from over there and put them over there, or collect 7 of these from wherever and put them there, like the kind of thing that you might give to if you had like a gaming executive assistant and you're like, you figure this out for me, I just need this to happen.
That is what Alexa is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like if you go back to like the vision for Alexa, right? It's to be a trusted AI, somebody that's very convenient, right? She's always there, she's fulfilling, etc. Like that's what you would want to design a game around, right? And we touched upon that earlier on. It's about, we could just take an HTML5 game, plug it on Alexa, use voice as your controller and go from there. But it's much more interesting to think about how you can use your voice to kind of issue these like loaded commands, right? These really complex, context-sensitive commands.
Yeah, I think, but for a button press, it's like it's not one button press to do something like send a tactical squad to a location. It's like you got to go into a menu and you got to dig through. If you could just shout something like Red Squadron, Quadrant 4, and send your guys over to there.
Yeah,
or,
you've got me thinking about a
Pack
game
of
I've been
6.
playing for a little while. Has anybody here played Dwarf Fortress?
I
Yeah,
love
of
Dwarf
course.
Fortress. I'm obsessed with Dwarf Fortress.
So that feels to me like that kind of tactical strategy, right? Where I'm not individually controlling any of those dwarves, but I do need some wood, and I need this thing to happen over here. And man, that seems like that could be a pretty good application of this.
Yeah, and Dwarf Fortress is actually a super interesting use case because there's more UI than you can fit in the screen in Dwarf Fortress. Like you're constantly digging in to find things, right?
Yeah.
And it would be great to be able to ask, like, where do I have this stuff? And who's currently free?
Right.
And like actual just natural language. The stuff that in your brain you have to convert into like 10 mouse clicks. It'd be kind of neat to try to figure out
The
how
stuff
much
you're yelling at
context.
your screen while you're playing.
Just do what I'm saying, not what I click.
Right. Exactly right. All right. Well, I know we've got a really great conversation and good questions happening in the chat, and I definitely want to get to that. So before we do that, though, Ryan, I know you had the capability to show us a couple of games.
Yeah.
I'd love to take a minute and just show some people what some of these Web API for games look like.
All right. Give me a moment here. So I'll kind of walk you through a couple of my side projects as well as some of our partner games. So the first is Volley Solitaire. I think it is a beautiful game. We've talked about that before, so let me start that up. Alexa, open Volley Solitaire.
Welcome back to Volley Solitaire.
This is the optimizing first time to draw that we were referring to earlier. There's a nice retention mechanic. No, nobody criticized my gameplay. Alexa, draw. 10, Jack, Queen, King, Jack of Hearts, Queen, King, draw, 9, 10, Jack, Alexa, stop. So
For playing.
what was neat about that, again, you saw how rapid fire that gameplay was, right? I was able to just bring in the voice, read what was on the screen. I could optionally tap on that. Alexa, stop. I could optionally tap on the screen. So it had voice commands as well as the equivalent tap commands. Again, very engaging, very rapid fire. I thought that was pretty cool.
Is that
That's
something
beautiful.
Is that something that's unique to Web API for games? The ability to rapid fire like that?
That's right. Yeah. There is a local JavaScript API that you're able to open up the microphone, so you're not doing that cloud round trip. You're not sending a command up to the cloud to get the skill to set a should end session equals false, and then open up the microphone from there.
Got it.
To be clear, though, that the ability to accept multiple inputs, multiple values for a slot is available on headless as well.
It is, but you either have to wake word it if you're interrupting what's happening, or you have to respond with those multiple values during the time that Alexa opens the microphone.
Right,
I can tell you without looking that there is a question below in the chat somewhere that's like, how can I use that for something that isn't related to this? That's coming because there are a number of applications for that. I think there's a lot of little nuanced experiences around Alexa that people would love to be able to take advantage of, but they only work in certain use cases, or they're not allowed at all, or whatever. And so anytime we hint at one of those things, like this kind of does, there's always I want to use that for this other purpose. And it's unfortunate that it only works in specific scenarios, but I certainly understand why.
So one bit of just before we go on, one bit of some neat trivia about design trivia about what we just saw that I think warrants mentioning before we move on. It was when Ryan gave his first set of commands that was a series, only the first card moved. And the reason for that is because his second command was ambiguous. The Jack actually had two different suites, and so the game didn't know which one to do. And interestingly, this game chooses not to say that, but just indicate it with a sound effect and by jiggling the cards.
Yeah.
And that was also, I think, a conscious design decision to make the game flow faster. And a really interesting contrast between our normal skill development UX and what happens when you have a customer who is engaged looking at the screen. You know they're for sure looking at the screen because they have to look at the screen to play it. It's really interesting to see that evolution happen.
I'm curious. I don't know how deep you thought about this, but the thing that stood out to me with that experience that I just watched was the accessibility side of it. For someone that has limited use or maybe no use or maybe doesn't even have something that we take for granted in arms and hands, I'm trying to think of a situation in which they could play solitaire in their entire lives. That doesn't seem like it's very a thing that they've had many opportunities to do. This unlocks that.
Yeah, there are a lot of accessibility affordances out there in the gaming space. It's actually a pretty wonderful space to dive into, and I encourage everybody to try it out. But yeah, the sort of the low cost of Alexa devices combined with the low barrier to entry for anybody to develop these kinds of games now, I think is a novel thing. I think we're in a new space here.
Yeah, that was really powerful. That stood out to me for sure. All right, Ryan, we're still on your device. Do you have one more you want to show?
Yeah, we'll do one more. We've talked about Phaser. So this is a game that I've been developing. I kind of showcased it a little bit when this Echo Show 15 launched, talking about portrait mode. But it's one of the games that I would love to see. It's a genre of a game that I would love to see folks build more of. And this is kind of the idle or the casual kind of sim battler. So without further ado, I'll jump into it. And again, this is my dev skill, so expect things to crash. Alexa, open Little Champions skill.
Just gotta get set up here. 1 second.
Alexa, let's go. So I can launch via voice or via touch. Alexa, open the lava world.
So, entering report. Let's find those artifacts.
And again, little tween there.
Let's get back to the action.
I don't have the voice commands hooked up, but everybody has special attacks and special battles where they can tap on the screen, or you can issue commands. Loot drops on the screen, which I can also collect, add to my bag, and it kind of goes through these sprites as it goes on the screen, and the game just kind of keeps playing. So if I were to step away from the game, come back 2 hours later, it would tell me that I've accrued X number of experience points and coins and things like that. And then I could come back and play that. So if anybody's played, one of the mobile titles like Mobile Legends Adventure, even to the extent that you could have any of those like battle sims, this is the type of game that I would love to see more of, because you can kind of have this just play in the background.
Yeah, I like this. One of the questions I had that stood out to me, again, as the developer, I'm always like, how did you do that? You were on the screen where it said go to the lava world.
Yep.
Obviously, there needs to be, as I think about a traditional skill development, right? I need to have an intent or something designed with a slot that has a list of the different kinds of worlds so that I can refer to those. Is there something different that's done, or are you taking the same kind of approach to provide a collection of worlds?
Exactly the same approach. So the interaction model is built. Alexa, exit. Exactly the same type of approach. I'll jump back to my cam here. Exactly the same type of approach where you have like a visit world intent. You have the game type or the world type, and then you're filling that accordingly. I use something called dynamic entities so that it's contextually sensitive, where if the forest world or the ice world aren't unlocked, that won't be something that gets slotted in. Otherwise, that just gets sent over to my backend, and then all of the game logic the game logic is sitting in the web app. So that's another differentiating characteristic is when you're building games on the web API, you can choose to have most of your logic sitting in the skill, and that's really kind of driving it forward. So I could have checked at that outset, is this world unlocked, etc. I chose the other way around where, like Chris was mentioning, voice is really just the controller. So 95% of the logic is sitting in the web app, and I do a check over there to say, has this world been unlocked? If not, send a TTS back to the skill to vocalize to say, hey, you haven't unlocked that world yet, or, I'm not sure what you're talking about. So the exact same mechanisms that you have for developing an APL skill or headless skill apply to that. You're just sending the payload down to your web app to do something, and then to either animate somebody on screen or to unlock something and then kind of move on from there.
Got it. Okay, one more technical question on that is that when I live in a voice or APL traditional Alexa skill world, I could, let's say I have a pizza ordering skill, right? And so I go in and I order a pizza, and I'm starting to order the pizza, and then halfway through I realize, no, you know what? I'm just going to run over to the store and pick it up. I'm not going to deliver it. So I just want the contact information for the store. And so in the middle of pizza ordering, I'm just like, hey, what's your store's phone number? And the skill will pivot, right? It'll be like, oh, our phone number is XYZ, whatever. If I were in the middle of the game, I've got the big guy with the axe swinging, and we're moving, and it's been running for a little while, and I were to say, go to Lava World, which is a thing that I could say earlier.
Yep.
In your game, what happens?
So through development of a web API skill, you still have to manage the state the same way that you would like at a headless skill if you had like some adventure, play your own adventure type of game. So I have what is on the screen. I know that state. So if I'm in the battle scene and I'm engaged in combat, if you were to say something like go to the lava world right now, that would actually just take you back to the previous kind of scrolling lava screen, and you would jump out. But I've also saved the state that I was in so that I know that there's 5 of 7 enemies defeated. So if you jump back into level 2, you'll jump right back into combat. So the same type of, if Chris was mentioning, somebody's at the doorbell or I've got to use the washroom, I can just say exit or stop. I jump out and I can just jump right back into the battle scene. I won't have to go through I'll go through the load screen, but I won't have to go through the map screen and things like that, because you want to get that player right back into the combat.
Can we also introduce the concept of things like pause?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually,
Yeah.
there's a
So
game
your guys
called,
are heading again. They were running through the lava world. They were attacking enemies, and the doorbell rings. I say pause.
Yep.
It just stops the loop.
Absolutely.
Everything's waiting. Is there a timeout? Will the screen dim out? Will the skill time out at some point?
When you send your initial HTML.start directive, you set the timeout for how long the game will allow you to sit idle. So currently it's supported for up to about 30 minutes where it could kind of stay on the screen without customer input.
Cool.
Yeah, you've hit on a couple of really fundamental ideas there, Jeff. The first one being that routing is in an environment like a game tends to be significantly more complex and is entirely state dependent. So when you say what is your phone number, in most skills, it's okay to just write the handler that this is the response to this particular question. But in a game context, normally what you'd end up doing is routing that intent to the game. And then much like when you do GUI design and when you click on the screen, it's important which screen is up front. And you end up having to do the bubbling and the logic for determining whether or not you can click through things and so on. Intents work the same way now. You think about like what's currently going on in my game. What was the last thing I asked the player? Is it important for me to distinguish whether or not this might be a misrecognized answer or if the player actually wants to do something else? So you end up building these multiple contexts for how to deal with input, and that's an entirely new space to explore as well. It's very interesting to think about what happens when your players can do stuff that's not on screen, unlike with a GUI. If you hide the button, they can't click it, but you can always say something in voice games. The other one is about as you say, the interaction loop in web APIs is quite different from the way the interaction loop in a normal skill behaves. In normal skill, when the customer doesn't say something, it's the end of the task. But with Web API, the application continues running on the device, and when you break back in again by using the wake word, or if you open the microphone from an event or from touch, you're still in the same session. The application is still running, the customer is still speaking to the same skill. And it's perfectly fine for an application to go quiet for a while, to run in the background, and the customer not having to say anything. And that also changes a huge amount of the way that we design interactions with skills.
No, that's great.
I was going to interrupt real quick because I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Like, I would love to pick someone's brain for a game. We have a Discord for Alexa games as well as the Slack. So maybe we should just go ahead and plug those real quick if you want to get into any deeper conversations about those things. I know we got the link for the Slack. We can put that on screen. And if y'all have a Discord invite, that would be terrific too, because I'm on there. And if you have questions at either place, it's a good place to ask questions about Alexa development in general. But we've also got a games channel on the Slack. So
that's a great point, Amanda. So the link for Slack is on the screen. Is there a URL that people could go to look for the specifically the Alexa Games Discord?
We do have an invite link. If we don't get it up now, we will set it out in our show notes.
Okay. And for those of you that might be looking for that afterward, we will include that in the description of the YouTube recording of this video.
There were a couple other questions in Slack, or sorry, in the comments that I can see. I can kind of riff off some of them here. One was whether or not Web API allows you to open the microphone for longer than 8 seconds. The answer is no. So when you open up the microphone, we follow the exact same rules as defined for headless or APL skills. There is, however, a feature that allows you to have an extended microphone timeout to go from the normal 5 to 8 seconds up to 10 seconds. So that's not Web API related. I can see if I can Google that quickly, but that is something you might want to look at if you're looking to have the microphone open for longer, if you have your double Jeopardy question or what have you.
Perfect. Well, I have another question that came in right after that from Quell, QU311 on Twitch, which was, where did it go? In an Alexa hosted skill, the skill is saved through the cloud and Alexa developer website. Now, I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear your official stance on this. When I have the web API, the source of my game, right, the HTML and all that, when I'm building an Alexa game, where is that stored? My suspicion is it's stored wherever you want to store it. But I'd love if you guys have any perspectives on where the best places to do that if you're getting started from scratch is. That'd be good too.
Yeah, I think the interaction in the question there was between Alexa hosted skills specifically, right? So Alexa hosted skills does provide an S3 bucket, but the S3 bucket does require signature. So you can only serve one layer of indirection deep. So if you're using a sound file in an APL-A response, for instance, you can sign the URL and that will work just fine. But for Web API, unfortunately, if you sign the HTML and send it down, the HTML will try to load JavaScript, and JavaScript will not be signed, and that won't work. So unfortunately, Web API stuff cannot be hosted in Alexa hosted skills just yet. However, if you would like the equivalent thing, AWS free tier is free. All you have to do is sign up, and you can set up your own S3 bucket with appropriately for Web API, make it public, and serve it from there. And that will happily scale up to thousands of players, depending on the complexity of your game and the size of your download. Or you can select one of the higher level constructs in AWS, like Amplify, for instance. That makes it easier to host a web application. But yeah, I think the complexity of a web application, unfortunately, is slightly more than the hosted skill setup can deal with right now. We are investigating whether or not we can extend support here and there to make that part easier. But frankly, as a developer, I think the complexity of Web API game is large enough that you probably want more control anyway.
I totally agree. And I will tell you, for those that haven't played with S3, like if you're just setting up an AWS account, right, the free tier is pretty healthy. But then beyond that, the ability to host things publicly, the ability to even do static web hosting directly out of the S3 bucket, I found a lot of power in that for a number of applications. So it's definitely worthwhile to pay attention to that. Do you happen to know off the top of your head, Chris, what the upper limits are on the free tier?
No, but it's like a million Lambda invocations. It's many gigabytes of data through S3. Like it's if you're engineering a relatively tight Web API game, the free tier will take you quite a long way. And even when you pass the free tier, the charges won't be outsized. I, for instance, like using databases in my backend for customer persistence. I like having metrics to be able to see what my customers are doing, what they're asking for in game. That kind of stuff is just so much easier to set up when you control your infrastructure.
Totally agree. The explanation I give to everyone when we talk about free tier levels at AWS is that by the time you hit the level, you should be monetizing the things that you're doing. Like it should allow you to have a pretty substantial amount of success before you ever run into any costs. And at the point that you're hitting those costs, you should look at yourself and be like, what am I doing wrong that I'm not making enough money to cover these few dollars in hosting charges or whatever, right? Like at that point, you should have enough audience or enough traffic to justify monetizing.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, if you're doing this as a business and you wanted to have a P&L sheet, then the P&L sheet can include your infrastructure for sure. Yeah. But I mean, I've got several skills out, including game skills, and I have zero AWS costs yet. And I'm still entirely in the free tier.
I'm the same way. This is a complicated question. I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but they also asked, have you considered rendering game frames in the cloud and just displaying the streaming video like Game Pass and Google and a number of other services, even Luna does?
Yeah, I mean, great question. Obviously, it's entirely plausible. We won't do that in the near term as a package service for a number of reasons. That doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense for us right now. But because the Web API supports playing video streams and WebRTC, it's entirely plausible for people to do that on their own if they're super interested in experimenting with that kind of technology.
I think Big Bold Slank also asked, does Web API allow WebSockets? Absolutely. Chris, I know has created a couple of really cool POCs. In fact, if you check out the blog that we posted, one of those samples does leverage that. You can leverage frameworks like synchronous multiplayer. If you just build a Node.js application, you could have that running across an Alexa device, a mobile phone, or a website. And that's all supported.
Yeah, WebSockets are an entirely fascinating space to mess around with here. The sockets you can establish sockets. The only thing that in that space that you cannot do, that we block on Web API on our devices, is that you cannot get access to the camera or the microphone. So you can't, for instance, make an in-game chat with a video chat kind of deal. We unfortunately can't allow that on our devices at this time, but RTC data channels are available as well as WebSockets, and both of those provide all kinds of interesting multiplayer possibilities, as well as things like I've done internal demos of using a mobile phone as a controller for a game running in Web API,
Wow.
which is interesting.
That sounds cool.
You can totally set up the kind of multiple players, each on their own phone kind of deal with a Fire TV in the center, hosting a game. Those kind of things are awkward to distribute to people. Getting people to
Right.
sign up for those kind of things is difficult. So I think it's hard unless you have the right IP or the right other sort of supporting things to get that kind of game off the ground in a commercial sense. But as a developer, it's ridiculously fun to experiment with those
But I
things.
could see it be really, really, really fun for like a party game, like a Jackbox type of thing, where people are like voting on people's drawings or something like that. Like if you got everybody together and you were doing like a Pictionary, that
One
would
of
be really fun.
one of our product managers, Ian Vo, actually created an example of this again as a POC and published it called Slime Time. So if I could get some help posting that link in the chat, folks can actually click and try that right now. So you take your phone, you scan a QR code, and you're able to control your character around the screen. And in the coming months, we will be open sourcing these examples here, so that if this is what an example of a game you want to build, you'll be able to clone that repo and kind of get started right away.
Yeah, that's cool. Amanda, you said Jackbox. That was exactly what I was thinking too. They
Yeah,
have the right kind of IP to do that kind of stuff really well. That's a really fun approach to all of
I
this.
saw that comment come up in the chat too, but that was what popped into my head because I'm imagining like your whole family sitting around and like maybe one person is drawing something on the screen and everybody else is voting on how bad the drawing is. Or
I mean, you can do poker as well, right? Everyone can have their hands on their phones and then do like the big turn on the big screen.
Totally.
oh, that's
Yeah,
fun.
there's a bunch of good ideas in here. Someone said they'd love to see Farmville, which that would be a complicated build, but I think you could probably do it. But car racing, flight simulators. There's a lot of I think there's a lot of opportunities here.
Car racing is a super interesting one. At one point, I think I wanted to do so. When people say voice in car racing, I think about rally navigators being like the second person in the car and then like having to call out the turns. But then when I was trying to figure out how to make that mechanically interesting, I was thinking of so remember the game Flight Control on iOS, the one where you had to like draw the path for planes to land onto the airport. I was thinking it'd be kind of cool to be in a rally game, not to be the driver, to see the map sort of come at you and then have to guess the angles for the turns. And depending on how close you are to the right read of the map, you would get a more efficient turn, and you'd have a life meter and all that kind of stuff. And then so you're basically just calling out angles and turns by reading the map, and then your driver either says like "awesome," "great," or like
Sounds
"what the
fun.
hell are you talking about?" And
I
then
think
you
I would
drive off a
skew
cliff.
off to the bushes. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
So I don't know if anybody here, I'm sure you guys have had a chance to play the Lie Swatter Alexa skill, which is a Jackbox game. But
haven't
Big Bold
actually.
Swank, who's here in the chat with us, he's actually the one that built it.
Oh, neat! Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Welcome to
building
the
cool
show.
stuff.
Wow. Well, we burned through the questions pretty fast. Soundmaster AJ had an interesting comment here as we were talking about limits on AWS. He said that he's got 4,000 users, 25 million requests. Every 30 days, he's got almost 6 terabytes of data. I'm sorry. Every month, he's got 6 terabytes of data, and that costs him about $600 a month. And then some S3 and CloudFront stuff gives him about 25 more. So it's about $600 or so a month to handle all of that traffic. And that's while that is a substantial cost, with 4,000 users, like if they're really coming and playing your game regularly like that, you could do a pretty low subscription and more than cover your costs. But again, if you're building a business, you've got to think about all of the costs that are involved, and including paying yourself. So
Yeah, it sounds like the 5.7 terabyte probably is one of the larger portions of that cost. Data transfer costs tend to be very high. I'm going to assume from that description that it's a streaming skill. And so it's needing to serve a lot of audio files potentially.
Right.
The one thing that I guess ties into what we're talking about here is there might be a potential, depending on exactly what the use cases over there, for using the web API, if it turns out that it is a game, to cache more of that material on device. So normally when you're returning responses for an Alexa skill, there's not that much caching that goes on because the Alexa skills in the cloud and yada yada. There's all sorts of asynchronous things going on that prevent them from being true. But for Web API games, what I found is that the games I serve tend to hang around on people's devices for quite a while. So I end up serving it to a customer once or twice, but they're playing it 5 or 6 times. And that's quite a huge, substantial saving in terms of bandwidth.
For sure. Well, talking about bandwidth, I've got one final question before we wrap up here. And that is, they wanted to know about streaming MP3s using audio player directives, pretty standard MP3 listening. But the question is about using Alexa hosted skills built in the dev console using the secured S3 bucket that we talked about earlier. They said that they thought the rule was that if you're going to play MP3s in that fashion, you actually have to have them in a public bucket rather than the secured one using Alexa hosted. I feel like you would be able to build a skill that just had some simple MP3s that were streamed from an Alexa hosted bucket, but I didn't know if you guys might have some perspectives on that.
So we said earlier that the trick was the signing of the URLs is the issue, because the bucket in an Alexa hosted skill cannot be public. In the strictest sense, if you were going to make an application, a web API application, where you could pack everything into the single HTML page, you could sign that and send it down, and the application could run. And then if the application asked your backend to sign each of the MP3s, that would also work. Okay. That's a bit of a runaround to do that. It's theoretically possible, but again, frankly, if you're getting to the point where you're adept enough to do that, you are probably going to benefit from just doing it yourself in AWS. You'll have way more options. There are more streaming options in AWS than just S3 that are better aligned with it. Again, you could deal with your own caching and performance trade-offs to work out what your costs are going to be. You can optimize all of that stuff significantly more easily outside of the confines of the Alexa hosted scale system.
All right, and then there's one follow-up question. I don't think the answer is yes to this, but they said, does a publisher gain any security by also having their public audio on S3 accessed via a signed URL as well? So even though they're public files, sending them out signed, I don't think that gains you any specific security. No,
if you're already public, there's no point in signing. Signing is definitely for limiting who has access to the files in the first place.
All right, last question as we wrap up our thing. We've only got about 3 minutes left. This is something that I think everybody can benefit from as we ask this question. So what types of games do you want our developer community that's watching this video, what do you want them to build? What's missing? What do we need more of?
I mentioned one earlier. One would be like an idle or casual sim games. Again, taking advantage of that longer timeout on device, being able to casually interact with the game as it kind of continues playing along, to check in with it. That would be one type of game I'd love to see more
of. For me, I have 0 answers to that, because what I want to see is whatever the hell people want to make. Like that's what excites me. I want to see what comes out of other people's heads. Having said that, if anybody wants to pitch ideas or bounce some stuff off and talk about possibilities, or like validate whether or not voice is the right approach, or whether designs need to bend to meet voice better, I'll hang out on the Slack and the Discord, and I'm more than happy to chat with you about your ideas.
I saw somebody in the chat earlier mention Deku Mud as well. That's a real throwback, but I got to tell you, I love mudding. We can talk. I think muds are awesome. It's a great use case. Super fun. Yeah, let's make some more muds, and interactive fiction is my baby. I like to see interactive stories. So if you get a little bit of visual associated with that, we could have all kinds of cool stuff made.
Does anyone remember mushes?
Yeah. Are you a musher? Are you a former? We should talk about that.
Yeah, I come from the 90s. We did a lot of weird things online in the 90s.
Oh my God. What if I bet you on a mush in the 1990s?
That would be crazy. But for the uninitiated, mush was multi-user, where mud was multi-user dungeon. Mush was multi-user shared hallucination, which was a super trippy name for basically a wiki game. So a game where you could jump in and edit your own parts of it, and then people could wander through it and interact with the things that you make. That would be super fun to do. You have so much
ability to personalize your own space, and you can write your own code and build your own stuff like within the interface of the game. It's just really fun.
Yeah, that would be super cool to have.
Yeah. All right, we are out of time today. Ryan, Chris, thank you guys so much for spending the time with us. it was beneficial for me. If nobody else got anything, I learned some stuff today. So I feel like our audience, based just on the conversation, this was a really good session. So I'm glad you guys were here. And Amanda, your gaming insight and help here is always welcome. So I'm glad you were able to join us too.
I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours.
Of course.
Like I said, it really lights me on fire. So I'm sure we'll see y'all again.
I hope you
when we have more to discuss.
Perfect. Well, with that, we're going to sign off. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Like I said, we'll be here again next week. So make sure to tune in, and we'll see you guys all again next Tuesday.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.